Labdien, Excellences!
Good afternoon, Excellencies, colleagues, and our guests. The time has come to start our conference. A short piece of technical information about the language regime. So we'll have interpretation in the English, French, German, and Latvian languages. We are really happy to welcome you all in Riga, Latvia. We are in the building of the Latvian National Library. This building has been chosen as the official venue for the presidency events taking place in Riga. The Latvian National Library is also called the Castle of Light. That has been built in the shape of a glass mountain. We understand the freedom, the knowledge and the creative spirit with the Castle of Light. But the glass mountain symbolizes the difficulties that people have to overcome in their creative lives towards the peak of the mountain and towards their goals. I believe that these symbols equal those growth, welfare and other goals that we strive to achieve in the common European value space. But it is also important that these goals are implemented in a reasonable time and in line with the progressive development principles. It is important that these well-intended intentions are not just part of policy planning documents and do not lay to rest in the drawers of the officials. As to social rights, it's even more important that the things that we plan are available as quickly as possible to our people with regards to their everyday lives and needs. And it is important that the social cohesion, social continuity is ensured again and again, so that new goals are not set when the political players change. Irrespective of the physical and mental condition of the people, the state has to ensure that everyone has minimum possibilities, minimum conditions to ensure dignified circumstances for their families and themselves. The goal of this conference is to discuss about the progress of the EU and its member states with regards to the implementation of the UN Convention on the rights of persons with disabilities. As a person who has been officially entrusted to monitor the implementation of the convention, I have come to a conclusion that quite often large financial resources are not required to implement the convention. But more often we need just simple human understanding, empathy and ability to understand the needs of persons with disabilities. More and more we need understanding that people with disabilities can and may live in our societies like other people. They just need some support to a larger or smaller extent. They don't need our sympathy. They need the minimum from us. They need good education, they need employment, they have to be valued, they have to feel that they are needed by the others. Those rights included in the convention are of horizontal character, and in their essence they fall within the intersectoral competences and policies. Now I would like to give the floor to the Minister of Welfare of the Republic of Latvia, Mr. Uldis Augulis. Thank you. I'm really honored to open a conference on inclusive education and inclusive employment for persons with disabilities. This conference is part of the high-level meeting organized by the Latvian presidency on the disability issues, prepared with the support of the European Commission. Shortly before the conference, we met with the representatives of governments of various EU countries to discuss what has been achieved and what challenges we have with regards to the implementation of the UN Convention on the rights of persons with disabilities. The panel discussions and workshops will continue our discussions just with more participants. We will look into the practices of our member states and come up with proposals for future action. Our presidency has focused on three main aspects: competitive, digital, and inclusive Europe. As to the social and employment policies, our priority is inclusive and sustainable participation in the labor market. The topic of this high-level meeting complies with all the topics, all the aspects that I mentioned before. But this meeting is just one of the events during which Latvian presidency has focused in particular on the needs of persons with disabilities. I'm really happy that during our presidency, the issue of disability has been widely spoken about, not only with regard to the social policies. Let me mention some examples. At the beginning of the presidency, the Latvian State Rescue and Fire Service organized a seminar on the needs of persons with disabilities during and after various disasters. And the results of this seminar were included in the conclusions of the Council of Justice Ministers that took place on the 12th of March. Also, the needs and the abilities and capabilities of persons with disabilities has been focused on during the interparliamentary dimension. And in particular, this was touched upon during a conference that took place in February in Riga this year. To promote the discussion and find the best solutions with regards to high-quality social services and inclusion of persons with disabilities, the Latvian presidency will organize an expert conference in June with regards to the deinstitutionalization and the development of social policies in Europe. During the events organized by the presidency and as well as during various discussions with regard to the solutions needed to improve the quality of life of persons with disabilities, members of national parliaments as well as very many sectoral experts are involved that do not deal with social issues on a daily basis. I believe that all the events that we have already organized and that we will organize during the presidency will provide significant contribution to full implementation of the UN Convention in Europe. In such events as this, where policy makers and representatives of the civil society, as well as well-known international experts from international organizations, as well as from the academic circles and the private sector, allows us to create the so-called critical mass to promote future development and innovative approaches. Not all of you have read all the research that is available. Not all of you have specific professional skills. Not all of you have been able to learn about the experience of other countries. But here we have the possibility to find out all these things and then to apply what we have learned to the real life. We ratified in Latvia the UN Convention in 2008. After that, the government has adopted several policy planning documents setting the priority areas and measures that have to be implemented to meet the obligations under the Convention. When we submitted the first report on the implementation of Convention last year, we could report to the UN Committee on Persons with Disability about several measures that we have implemented. Still, we have to do a lot here to ensure that people with disability have the opportunities for inclusive education and inclusive employment so that they can live independently, financially, and in other ways. I'm sure that other member states have similar challenges. And this is the reason why during this conference we want to pay special attention on the inclusion of persons with disabilities in education and employment. At the end, I would like to underline that the Convention is a treaty on future opportunities. The children, the current generations, have to benefit most from the change in the approach offered by the Convention. Because here we speak about participation, about possibilities, instead of being passive and not being able to so that children in the future can be independent and can participate in all the social processes. And to do that, they need education and social skills to become employees or employers. I would like to use this opportunity to say thank you to all the participants, to all the guests, to all the reporters of this conference for sharing their knowledge, for providing their opinions, for enriching our discussions. I believe that this will allow us to find the best solutions with regards to the improvement of the quality of life of persons with disabilities, especially concentrating on the future opportunities for children with disabilities. I wish you fruitful discussions, many new ideas, inspiration for productive improvement in the disability policies in the member states and in the European Union as such. And I would like to use this opportunity to invite you to find a moment in between the discussions to attend an exhibition that we have set up on this floor. And this exhibition consists of pieces of art or crafts made by people with disabilities. Thank you to Mr. Augulis for a statement on what has been achieved and what we plan to do in the future. And as you saw in our agenda, the presidency wanted to concentrate on the possibilities for children with disabilities. The current and future possibilities of such children are closely related to educational opportunities. Education that is inclusive, as close to their homes, and are to the best interest of these children. Thus, I would like to give the floor to the Minister of Education of the Republic of Latvia, Ms. Mārīte Seile. The floor goes to you.
Thank you, Mr. Jansson. Dear colleagues, I'm honored to be here in this conference that talks about very important issues. Each of us is something unique. We are different in unique ways. Sometimes this difference can help, but sometimes it can lead to additional difficulties. Inclusive education is about inclusive society. To create a school that is based on our values and based on breaking the barriers for all of the students. A lot of documents have ensured this. These documents expresses the need and necessity for independence. The same could be said in UN Children's Rights Convention and the declaration that set forth inclusive education that combined the segregation problem and eliminating this segregation to make it more inclusive. In the last decade in Latvia, this has been one of the most important questions in education. When Latvia became a partner of UN Civil Rights Declaration, when we became a member of UN, the education became more important. In this educational law, the special education has been set out as a different education. It means that students, respective to their skills, need to be provided with education that corresponds to the standards of educational system in Latvia. The same could be said about the support actions that have been initiated to provide education for children with disabilities and integration of the children with disabilities in the common educational system. Now we have almost 11,000 people in educational system, and almost half of them learns and studies in the common schools. We work on research to find the necessary and respective solutions and ways. In the legislative basis for educational principles, we look at the context, and we need to stress that it's very important to include these children throughout other possible ways. We work so we would achieve inclusive education, but we need to understand that there is a lot to do to carry out these principles. We need to improve our school programs and need to use our new technology to do so. We need to improve our cooperation between parents and professionals and the teachers to help the students as the best we can. It's very important that the educational sector and the employment sector work together, so that we would open the labor market for the people with disabilities as well. The same importance, and maybe very difficult to achieve, is to change the attitude of the society, and this is a long-term goal. We work so that we would achieve this inclusive education, but the road we are on, is a road we need to take and walk on for a long time. Inclusive society begins with each of us. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Seile. I think that the cooperation of these sectors, is what we need to develop action plans and tools for inclusive education. But as my colleague said, the attitude of society is the most important. Now the floor is given to Director General, the President of Director General, Maria Luisa Cabral. She is the head of Unit of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and I must add that her institution really helped us with organizing this event.
For giving me the floor, and also for the Latvian presidency for having organized this conference and bringing to the political agenda the issue of disability. We are very happy to support and co-finance this conference. When ratifying the United Nations on the Rights of Persons with Disability, the EU committed to do the necessary within its competence to ensure that persons with disability participate fully and equally in the economy and in society. The Commission is fully committed to the equal opportunities of persons with disability and to non-discrimination in general. As President Juncker said, discrimination has no place in Europe and no one should be left behind. In today's conference, we will discuss the important issues of education and of employment. Even if we are all member states and the EU alike taking action to improve the situation of persons with disability, the data that we have before us doesn't give a very positive picture. In terms of employment, there is a gap between the employment rate of persons with disabilities and those without disabilities of over 20 percentage points. The same goes for education, where the gap is of 10 percentage points in relation to early school leaving and tertiary education. This is simply not acceptable. We need to do more and better. Even if member states have the prime responsibility in these areas, this does not mean that the European Union should not do more and also better, and that we can support member states in their action. In the framework of the European semester, we do point to the biggest divergences that exist and support national reform 11 country reports published in early 2015 point specifically to the situation of persons with disability. With the European Social and Investment Funds, we invest in measures that promote equal opportunities, both in employment and in education. We support the deinstitutionalization process that is key to ensuring independent living for persons with disability, and measures to combat discrimination in general. EU law prohibits discrimination in employment on the grounds of disability. Employers are obliged, public and private, are obliged to provide reasonable accommodation to persons with disability. This means taking the necessary measures to adapt the workplace and working conditions in order to ensure equal access and equal opportunities for persons with disability. As most of you know, 2015 is an important year for disability policies at EU level. We are currently engaged in a dialogue with the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability on how the EU has implemented its obligations under the Convention. We will have to reply in writing to a list of questions on a very broad range of issues by the end of June, and in August we will be in Geneva in front of this independent committee to defend how good we've done it and to listen humbly on the things that we have not done that well and that we could do better. This is a first for the European Commission and the Union, as this is the only human rights treaty to which the European Union is a party to. So this is an important process, and we are giving it the attention it merits in the European Commission. We will make use of this process, and in particular of the UN concluding recommendations that will be available in September, for the review of the European Disability Strategy that goes from 2010 to 2020. We are halfway through, and I would say that the dialogue with the UN comes at a perfect moment. This will allow us to adapt our strategy and, if needed, focus where action is required with more urgency and where action at EU level can bring more value. It will also provide an excellent opportunity for the European Commission to renew its commitment in relation to the rights of persons with disability. We will also use, for sure, the outcomes of this conference and the many ideas and best practices that we will hear today and tomorrow. Because only into partnership with persons with disability and their representative organizations, only together with member states and action at national and local level can we all make the United Nations Convention on Disability a reality and really empower persons with disability to use these rights and become full and active European citizens. Thank you.
Paldies, Cabral kundzei par.
Thank you to Ms. Cabral for informing about what has already been done, about informing us about the future perspective, and for outlining all the progress that you have managed to achieve. I would like to invite you to inspire the national countries to invest greater efforts to ensure what has been stipulated or imposed by the international human rights standards for people with disabilities. I'm really happy to welcome Mr. Nils, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe here in Latvia. The floor goes to you. Thank you, Mr. Jansons, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. I'm really happy to be in Latvia and speak about the human rights in Latvia. I have had many opportunities, and I think I'll have many opportunities to address the Latvian people with regards to the human rights issues in Latvian. So probably I will continue in English for my voice to be heard better in the faraway Europe.
In this event, and I want to thank the Latvian Ministry of Welfare and the European Commission for organizing it. I think such events should be regular occurrences in the European Union. I think it's crucial to take stock of the implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I think I can contribute to this stock-taking process because I have 3 years of monitoring experience behind me. I've looked at the situation of persons with disabilities in greater or lesser detail in 12 country visits so far, 10 in EU member states and 2 in non-EU member states. And I focused on several priority issues. First of all, the right to live in the community and deinstitutionalization, the right to legal capacity, and the right to inclusive education. I've encountered the same issues, the same challenges, the same problems in virtually all the places I've been to. In Western and Eastern Europe, in EU and non-EU countries, in rich countries and not so rich countries. Why? I think everybody is lagging behind in bringing international standards to life, to bring the UN Convention to life. It's quite commonplace to talk about the shift from a medical to a social model of disability. Now, this shift was endorsed by states when they ratified the UN Convention. Shift was the EU pledged to bring this to life, this shift, when it acceded to the convention. But my conclusion is that neither member states nor the EU completely have internalized this shift in their way of operating. Very often I've seen small changes, tweaks to the social care system which are not compliant with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Sometimes we see legislative changes without adequate resources being devoted to the changes. Often reforms are haphazard or incoherent. But most importantly, I think there's been too little involvement of persons with disabilities themselves in the process. There has been progress in some cases. We had a lunch where all we heard was about good practices. I want to talk about some bad practices from my monitoring work, about the slowness of the process, about the lagging, the long road still ahead, the traps and pitfalls into which many member states have fallen. And very often we see changes that look like progress, but if you scratch and go beneath the surface, you see old approaches repackaged and presented with new names. I will illustrate this by looking briefly at the right to education. The CRPD enshrines the obligation to inclusive education, to include children in mainstream education. I've examined this in 5 countries so far, in the Czech Republic, in France, in Netherlands, Romania, and Spain. And what I've seen is an incredibly mixed picture. There are some countries where segregation is quite common or almost a norm. A lot of segregated educational facilities in the Czech Republic. There are other countries in which the majority of children are in mainstream education. I think Spain has done quite well here. But I've also run into shocking statistics where 80% of all children with autism in France have no access to mainstream education, for which France has been found in violation of the European Social Charter on several occasions. Exclusion starts in so-called special schools or special classes. And sometimes, as I say, member states settle for segregation, but they use nice-sounding labels. One country I visited used the term appropriate education. Another talked about inclusive education centers. And behind these labels were the same old segregated educational institutions. Access to mainstream education in and of itself is not enough. It's no guarantee of inclusion, because very often under one roof you see separate classes for children with disabilities. Sometimes you see them educated only part-time. Sometimes they're shut off from extended day programs, and children with disabilities have higher dropout rates. So access alone is not enough. And lack of resources should never serve as an excuse for keeping children with disabilities in separate education. Unfortunately, existing supports are sometimes withdrawn when austerity measures are implemented. Saw some of this in Spain. At lunchtime, we heard that this is what has happened to a certain extent in Greece. Substandard education then can lead to exclusion from the labor market. We heard from the European Commission about the higher unemployment rates of persons with disabilities. We've seen in many places that quotas don't work because companies often don't comply, or they're happy to pay the fines because there's no clear obligation to ensure reasonable accommodation. Sheltered employment is not in line with the UN Convention, doesn't really lead to full inclusion in the labor market, and very often people in sheltered employment earn much less than the minimum wage. Failures in education and employment have their parallel in another area of concern to me, autonomy and inclusion in the community. We're still very far from eradicating the symbols of violations of human rights, large psychiatric institutions. They still exist in many, many countries. It is well documented in the case law of the European Court of Human Rights, the European Social Charter, as well as in the reports of the European Committee on the Prevention of Torture about the violations that very frequently take place in such large institutions. Bad conditions, ill treatment, neglect. And it's clear that institutions are bad for a number of other reasons as well. When you have large institutions, the convenience of the staff trumps the interests and needs of those living there. It restricts contact between people living in institutions and those outside of institutions. It leads to people on the outside grouping people together and seeing them as in a stereotyped manner, and this can feed into prejudices and further hinder inclusion. So institutions are a blatant violation of Article 19 of the CRPD and basic human rights principles. They still exist, and until recently, some EU member states used EU money to refurbish institutions or even to build new ones. And I'm very glad that the Commission has put in place new safeguards so that this will not happen anymore. Even in countries where we've seen major progress, there have been setbacks. For example, in Denmark, which abolished large institutions in 1998, many local governments have built large blocks of flats away from city centers, accommodating only persons with disabilities. Austerity has led to cutbacks in community-based services in Spain. Another trap, I saw this in Hungary, was that what was portrayed as deinstitutionalization often led to people being placed in large group homes or living centers, which look very much like institutions. As long as the wishes and choices of persons with disabilities are not at the heart of the services, they cannot be called community-based. Control over one's life is the core of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Now, control and decision-making is denied to many people who have been deprived of their legal capacity on the basis of an intellectual or psychosocial disability. Substituted decision-making, including full guardianship regimes, are still far too common in many member states. I welcome, for example, that Latvia and the Czech Republic were among the first to abolish plenary guardianship. I think the aim should be to replace substituted decision-making with supported decision-making. The lack of progress in this field, I think, stems mostly from the mental blocks, not of persons with disabilities, but of policymakers, legal professionals, and some psychiatrists. I think there are some promising pilot projects, including one in Latvia, which I've read about, and I think that these will play an important role, but they need support, they need to be expanded, and there need to be the requisite changes to the civil code. This brings me to the role of the EU. Disability is one of the few areas where the EU has a clear competence and obligations because it signed up to the UN Convention. I'm very pleased, and I think it's very positive that the EU has moved to avoid past mistakes, but I think that now we must make up for lost time. I think we need a coherent and ambitious plan to improve respect for the rights of persons with disabilities. I hope that the Commission will help and guide struggling member states, and I think that, for example, especially by making sure that EU structural funds are used to promote deinstitutionalization. And I think that we can all ask for more ambition. I've seen some member states that have deinstitutionalization strategies with a time frame of 30 years. In 30 years, everybody in that institution will be dead. So we need to be more ambitious and push for deinstitutionalization now over the next couple of years. Effective implementation of human rights of persons with disabilities requires coming to terms with prejudice. Prejudice fueled by stigmatization, exclusion, and ignorance tainted by paternalism and condescension. Some people still think that people are better off in institutions, that other people are better placed to take decisions for many people, and that these international standards are unreasonable, unrealistic, unaffordable. And I think this attitude is one of the main obstacles to the transformation called for by the UN Convention. In conclusion, I think we need the courage to listen, to involve persons with disabilities, to confront our own prejudices. And I think that for policymakers, this means that persons with disabilities should be true partners in this process, rather than anonymous beneficiaries of changes for which they should feel grateful. We need to change this relationship, and I think that this is the best protection against the many pitfalls we all face. Thank you for your attention.
Jā, paldies. Paldies, Muižniekungam.
Thank you to Mr. Muižnieks for his objective criticism, for his assessment, for paying attention to what is going on in Latvia, and maybe there are some very good examples that we can be proud of. And thank you for inspiring invitations on behalf of the Commission, and also with regards to the member states, so that they implement the convention more efficiently. And at the end of the opening statements, I would like to give the floor to Yannis Vardakastanis, the president of the European Disability Forum. We're really happy that you can be here, and on behalf of the persons with disabilities, you can provide your own assessment of the current situation. The floor goes to you.
Thank you. I'm honored and pleased, on behalf of the European Disability Forum, to be here today to address this important high-level meeting, which takes place during a critical and exciting year for the European Union and for persons with disabilities and their representative organizations. It is a key moment for EU and its member states to reflect on the progress that has taken place concerning the implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The European Disability Forum is a unique European platform. It is an independent organization bringing together organizations across the European Union and beyond, also at the European level, representing the 80 million Europeans with disabilities. I would like to start by recognizing the attention that the Latvian President has given to the rights of persons with disabilities, putting very high those issues in the presidency agenda. We hope that other presidencies will follow the very good example of the Latvian presidency. Nevertheless, we should keep in mind that the overall purpose of the Convention is to promote, to protect, and to ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities, including those who are confronted with intersectional discrimination and those who need more intense support. And we are far away from it. As the Commissioner of Human Rights from the Council of Europe, very well demonstrated just before me. Europe is facing a very structural financial crisis. In many cases, it has taken the form of a human rights crisis. And the first victims, or to say it better, the first among the victims are persons with disabilities and their families. Young people across Europe face phenomenal, unacceptable levels of unemployment, and of course, young people with disabilities amongst them. Exclusion from the labor market, tied to many forms of discrimination, is growing. Access to decent work within the EU is decreasing. Education services are under-resourced and are not inclusive. Vocational training as a prerequisite, as a preparation for inclusion in labor market is also decreasing. We have seen that indiscriminate cuts to social services are increasing school dropout, illiteracy, unemployment, and inactivity rates, poverty, and social exclusion of persons with disabilities. The Latvian government shows its vision in hosting this very important high-level meeting. There needs to be a political will and vision from the European Union and also its member states. This should be inspired by the Convention itself. The next presidencies should hold meetings like this. And as I said during the ministerial meeting earlier and during the press conference, there should be every first semester the presidency that holds, the country that holds the presidency should organize an informal council meeting. It's an opportunity that should not be missed. The UN Convention provides the platform, the framework for the European Union and its member states to develop and monitor the implementation of a progressive, forward-looking new disability strategy. The concluding observations that will be adopted by the UN Committee on 3 September should be very high on the agenda and should serve as an impetus to develop this new European disability policy. We need to go from words to deeds in practical and very easily implemented ways. The EDF has been very active in this process. We have presented our alternative report to the UN Committee. We have been present and are going to be present through the dialogue this year with the committee. EDF calls for the development of an EU anti-discrimination agenda for all persons with disabilities, including children and women with disabilities. Most importantly, the European Union should swiftly adopt the horizontal Equal Treatment Directive with a very important note. The text of this directive was agreed before the adoption, the conclusion, better said, of the CRPD by the European Union. And therefore, we need to see this text to make sure that it is in full conformity, in full compliance with the CRPD. We have seen the positive effects of the employment directive, but this is not enough because it has outlawed discrimination in the workplace. But what about discrimination in the transport systems, in putting away financial and fiscal barriers that prevent persons with disability to reach the workplace? Moreover, the CRPD principles go far beyond discrimination. They show, I'm finishing, they show the road towards the full enjoyment of all human rights. And of course, the involvement of representative organizations of persons with disabilities in a very structured way, in consultation both with the European institutions and with member states. The Human Rights Commissioner spoke about the way some member states have treated the implementation of the CRPD. There is a conservative and a progressive way to implement the CRPD. We should join forces to make the CRPD the real tool that will change both policies in the European Union and in member states. The nothing about us without us, it is not just a slogan. It is a way of living, a way of thinking. Thank you.
Paldies Vardakastaņa kungam. Paldies arī pārējiem ļoti cienījamiem runām.
Thank you, Mr. Vardakastanis. Thank you for all the speakers. I would like to tell that you have fruitful discussions and you get from words to works. Dear colleagues.
Thank you, sir, for giving me the floor. It's a question of point of order, so thank you. So, Mr. Chairperson, Excellencies and delegates, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me thank again the Latvian presidency for the organization of this two-day high-level meeting, focusing on the fundamental issue relating to the full inclusion of persons with disabilities. Nevertheless, I must officially express the disappointment of the Italian authorities for the decision to adopt a four-language system for this event. And this despite our clear requests put forward through appropriate diplomatic contacts. Italy has fully supported, always fully supported, the research of possible fair compromises in order to meet the need to limit interpretation costs. However, this cannot be done at the expenses of the respect of the principle of equal language dignity. A principle must be underlined that is rightly considered as a fundamental factor for the success of our common and final aim, that is European integration and inclusion. I will limit myself to recall that the issue of a language regime within EU is treated directly in Regulation number 1, 1958, that clearly indicates all 24 EU languages at the same time, I'm finishing, official languages and working languages of the institutions of the Union. We decided to take part in this meeting due to the importance for our country of the fundamental issue of promoting the right of persons with disabilities. However, I have to underline that the language regime adopted for this meeting cannot be deemed other than a procedural oversight. It cannot in any case to be considered nor constitute a precedent for other future meetings that will have to be organized under a proper language regime. Thank you very much.
Paldies par jūsu viedokli.
Thank you for your opinion. Now the floor is given to Mr. Augulis.
Atvainojos.
I have to apologize to Italy and all the other member states present here. Having assessed the composition of the participants of the conference and our financial means, we have the language regimes that we currently have. Of course, we as presidency are against all kinds of discrimination and would like to give the possibility to all of you to express yourselves in your native language, but unfortunately I have been deprived of this possibility in some other conferences, so I really have to apologize, but we cannot do anything as to the language regime. Thank you. I would like to invite you to be tolerant in the future because we are as we are. Colleagues, now I would like to say thank you to you. Currently, we'll have a short technical break. I would like to invite the Minister as representatives of the Commission and others take their seats at the table, and I would like to invite the participants of the panel discussion to come to the front.